Hey friends, it's Devin here with Make Anything, and it's been a while, but I promise, I haven't just been hanging around. I know, it's been a long time since my last video, and a long time since the video before that. What can I say? Moving to another country across the world and starting a new life is exciting and empowering, but it's also just a lot of work. I've also shifted my work a bit more towards the actual 3D printing design side of things and offering files over on Things, since that's just been a more sustainable business model for me right now. But I always love sharing things in this format and being silly on camera, so I'm glad to be back. I arrived to my new house here in Sweden early last year, and upon getting my first printer here, the Bamboo X1 Carbon, I got to work printing all sorts of things for my home. I had this crazy idea that I would print anything and everything that I possibly could. And that's why I still don't have chairs. I've come around and realized that idea is a bit over the top, but it doesn't mean I've stopped designing things for the home, by any means. In fact, I've been printing non-stop, and that's why I couldn't decide when to finally make this video. Some of you also wanted to know how my prints from the last video would hold up over time, and it's been over a year, so we're gonna take a look at some of those. And all the while, we're also gonna be looking at this printer, the Qidi Plus4, which I've been using to print most of these new things for my home. As always, there's a lot to cover, so let's get right into it and look at some cool prints. All right, let's unbox this printer we'll be using. Right away, we've got a bit of conflicting information about what's up. But I'm a high IQ individual, I figured it out. Qidi offered me this printer for free to review, and since I've really enjoyed their Q1 Pro printer, I decided to give it a shot. Like the Q1 Pro, this machine arrives nearly fully assembled, and it's quite massive, so you might want some assistance, or just be stubborn like me. The build volume is 305 by 305 by 280 millimeters, which is a fair bit more than both my Q1 Pro and the Bamboo X1 Carbon. It's also got an insulated, actively heated enclosure and a direct drive extruder with a hardened nozzle that can reach 370 degrees Celsius, so it's designed to handle trickier filaments. I did have to wrestle with this screen for a while because I didn't read the instructions well. You're supposed to wrap the cable around this little tab, and it's so short that it was a bit tricky, but I managed. The printer has a big glass cover, which looks pretty, but it can feel a bit precarious to handle, and there's no clear way to store it when you don't want the top covered. From here, we'll turn on the printer and continue following on-screen instructions to remove screws and zip ties, everything that kept it safe through delivery, and finally we'll pop on the spool holder and feed in the sample filament. Before I start any prints, I'll run through all the different calibration steps. This printer does have automatic bed leveling, but it's still wise to manually level when you first set it up. So it's the good old paper between the bed and nozzle technique, which feels a bit old school, but after doing it this one time, I've never had to do any more manual leveling. Nozzle cleaning is also automated with this little station in the back. It's got a silicone brush, a metal surface that plugs the nozzle, and this poop remover that will send purged filament out the back, just like the X1 Carbon. There's also this little activated charcoal filter to hopefully capture some VOCs, but I'll always suggest printing in a well-ventilated space to minimize exposure to any off-gassing. Like my other printers, we've also got input shaping and resonance compensation that makes it sound like the printer is gonna blow up. But that should lead to more accurate prints. So let's plug in the included USB stick and select a test print. This fidget spring looks fun enough for my nephew. And just like my last Qidi printer, the thumbnails seem to load excruciatingly slow. There is an option in the settings to turn off file preview, which speeds things up in this list of all the files on the thumb drive. But when you select one file to print, you still have to wait for that preview. But I quickly switched to printing over Wi-Fi, and then you're not using this menu often. But it's still silly. I also noticed this sticker that says to preheat the bed for several minutes before starting a print, since the bed is so thick. I didn't do that in this case, but it did prove to be necessary for larger full bed prints in the future to make sure the bed leveling is accurate. The Matrix auto leveling tests a whopping 81 points across the bed, which is nice for the sake of accuracy, but it does take several minutes, and I generally run it before any print since the settings didn't seem to apply to future prints. So off goes the print, and I won't spend too much time on this one because we'll be testing much more interesting prints throughout the video, but here's the result. It's fairly clean, although the seam is quite visible and there are a few ripples on the surface, which I suspected was at least partially due to my super wobbly table. So I moved the printer onto the floor and then redid the input shaping calibration. After that first test print, I did face one issue with the touchscreen reacting but not responding. I talked to Qidi support and they suggested checking this cable in the back. Sure enough, after unplugging and replugging it, that issue disappeared forever. All right, that's it for the setup of this machine. It was pretty straightforward. Like I said, I printed just about all of the prints in this video on this machine, so we'll keep touching on it throughout the video, and I'll give some closing thoughts at the end. But for now, let's get to the fun part, which is all the prints. Okay, let's get started by revisiting this space below my kitchen sink. Not the most glamorous location, but it is home to one of my favorite home prints. Trash cans are pretty underappreciated considering they're a big part of keeping the rest of the house looking clean. And that changed for me with these door-mounted trash cans because they are right where I need them, when I need them, and hidden when I don't. I love my trash cans. In the last Cool Prints video, when I introduced these, I had just finished ranting about how overrated print-in-place models are, and then I ate my own words with this print-in-place hinging lid. But guess what? This whole time, they didn't even have to be printed in place. The frame is already flexible enough to pop the two parts together. So, big L on my part there. Anyways, I was loving these bins as they were, but I did get a couple of suggestions in the comments. Some of you insisted that the lids need to stay open for one-handed operation, which I didn't really feel the need for at the time, but when you're cooking and you have messy hands, I could understand the appeal. So I spent some time figuring out how to make these lids stay open without having to change the overall design. And I basically just added some little tabs that flex out of the way so that you can snap the lid open. I've ended up really liking this, so thank you for that suggestion. Also in the first version, you could only open the lid from pushing back here, but now I've added this tab on the front, which is another way to open it up, and it's really helpful when you want to snap into this locked position because it just gives you that extra bit of leverage so that you can get that snap going. Lastly, some people were worried about the unsupported trash bags ripping open and spilling garbage all over the place. And while that still hasn't happened for me, I did try to design a similar removable tray for the bottom of the bags. The same kind of frame and a snapping bottom thing. I didn't quite get it to be stable enough, so I'm not really happy with this solution. And I just think it's bulky overall, so I haven't quite got a solution in this form factor, besides just putting these trays under the sink here, so you can keep a tray underneath it if you really want to. Instead, I ended up designing a completely standalone version of these bins. At first, I was planning to have this big enclosed trash can, like most trash cans, but even printing as a single wall in vase mode, it just ended up using way too much filament to make something this size. So that's how I ended up with this kind of wireframe design. This consists of several different parts that all snap together to support the trash bag. By splitting up the design like this, we can orient the different components for optimal strength and minimal material use. I also printed some little TPU feet for the bottom as an optional non-slip upgrade. And for those of you who were worried about leaky bags, I've added this removable tray that just sits in the bottom frame. It is definitely a unique aesthetic, but I think I leaned into it successfully with these colorful parts, and now I have one of these in nearly every room in my house. Of course, if you don't have the same bright red bags that we use here in Sweden, you can also create a more toned down look like I did with this black frame and gray trash bag. Boring.
Having the parts split up does make this model printable on my smaller machines, but being able to print multiple big parts at once on the Plus4 was definitely handy. It was with big prints like this where I noticed that you really do need to preheat the bed before starting a print. Otherwise, the bed leveling just wasn't as accurate as it needed to be to stick down over this large area. But when I got a handle on that and started waiting patiently for my bed to preheat, the parts were coming off of this printer super nice. I do wish that the wait time was just automatically integrated into the slicer, so you don't have to do that manually, but it's worked out. Speaking of trash, quite a few people were talking trash about my EZPZ folding coat hangers. Just feed the coat hanger through the bottom, they said. It's so much easier. Well, I respectfully disagree. I've been having a lot of fun with these. I've replaced every single coat hanger in my house with these folding ones, and I think it saves me a few seconds with every garment, and that adds up. Especially when you're taking things off on the way out the door, this is just so much quicker than going through the whole process of taking it off to the bottom, putting the hanger back up. I stand by these. I did play around with the idea of adding gears so that the arms open together and a spring on the lock so that it locks more reliably, but I really felt like that was getting overcomplicated versus this, which is just the right amount of complicated. That said, a lot of you have tried them by now, so do let me know your experience with these coat hangers, and if there's anything I can do to make them better, I'll see what I can do. The Qidi Plus4 really shined with these because it's got enough build space to print all of the parts for a hanger in one go, and then I can do that over and over again to make all sorts of different color combinations. You may have noticed, I really like colors. I've also printed another brush and dustpan. This was one of my more silly designs that I thought would be harder to justify over just buying a cheap brush, but I have to say, these hold up much better than I expected. They do lose the occasional bristle here and there, but I've been using all of the different sizes constantly, and I even use the big broom and pan outdoors quite effectively. Maybe it's still not worth it because a brush and dustpan are quite cheap, and it can be quite challenging to get the print settings just right for these bristles, but that's also why I printed this one to test out the Qidi Plus4, and it managed to handle this tricky print in ABS. I haven't made any new changes to this design, but I did want to share one crazy coincidence, which is that these hooks in my bathroom that were already installed when I bought the house make a perfect holder for this small dustpan. I'm not sure I would have come up with a better design from scratch, so let me know if I should make a printable version based on this same idea. Another design I revisited was my Italic Watering Can. From the moment I created this one, it was one of those rare form over function designs for me because I really just liked this iconic shape, but it actually ended up working better than I expected. Still, there were some clear areas for improvement with this one. I often filled this with water from rinsing out my coffee can in the morning, and the small filling hole would often fill too slowly or bubble up and spill, and the can ended up getting pretty dirty from spilt coffee water. So for version 2.0, I made it a little more like a traditional watering can, and I opened up the top, which makes it much easier to fill cleanly and effortlessly. That change does remove the ability to control the pour with your thumb, which was fun, but ultimately not that important. I also made the new handle just a tad longer, so it's easier to hold more securely. This version was printed using Qidi's ASA filament, and with the default settings, I managed to get this perfectly watertight print on my first try, and the overall print quality is really good. I did use ironing on the top surface, and you can see some small gaps and inconsistencies there, but ironing is a notoriously tricky setting, and you have to get just the right parameters for each filament in the slicer to get it to work out, so I don't blame that on the printer. In fact, I did manage to get some better ironing on the top of some of my chunky drip trays here, which are these minimal stands I designed alongside my multi-texture fuzzy planters. And these are nice because they have a water reservoir that's completely hidden. And as far as the ironing, the results definitely varied between different filaments. So that just goes to show that it's a matter of fine-tuning that. By the way, this whole multi-texture technique is really fun. I made a ton of different planters and pots and things using this technique, and there's a whole video about that, so you should definitely check that out as well. The next design I built onto were these accessories for my IKEA 𝐒𝐓𝐋 speakers. These already looked really nice and minimal off the shelf, but I couldn't help but go wild and keep customizing them, adding colors and whatnot. So I've added more handle variations, different button styles, and I also added these speaker covers, which are actually very functional because they protect the forbidden bubble wrap that are the speaker dust caps. These two are my current favorites, but I've made a bunch of different variations, including a version that you can customize yourself just by using the different infill settings in your slicer. And even modifying the STL file further wouldn't be too difficult if you really want to create your own unique vision. Speaking of visions, at some point I got this crazy idea of building an entire jungle gym of rings and monkey bars inside my kitchen and living room so I could just constantly swing around and play the floor is lava like childhood Devin could only dream of. I got as far as using the stud finder to map out all the joists across my ceiling, and I mounted up my first 2 rings before I actually went up to my attic and realized that my house does not have the structural integrity for that level of shenanigans. It's not impossible, but it would take way more effort than I was prepared for. So for the time being, I decided to just expand my setup outside of the house. For now. These gymnastics rings I printed before have been holding up super well, and while having them at this height is great for muscle ups, I wanted another set that was higher up for dead hangs. This time around, I printed these more triangular rings to save me some material, since I rarely end up hanging from the rounded bottom anyways. And I used that same green Qidi ASA that I used for my watering can, and this printed out beautifully on the Plus4. Now, last time I did quite a bit of sanding to smooth out the rings, but I wanted to test out a quicker technique this time around. First, I simply used a metal file to round out the edges that were against the print bed, and that did a great job really quickly, but I've also been meaning to try out a lazy version of acetone smoothing. Years and years ago, I shared an acetone smoothing technique for ABS, where I made a little heated acetone vapor chamber to smooth out the surface of my print. This works for both ABS and ASA, but this time around, I wanted to skip the entire chamber step and just brush acetone directly onto my print using a silicone brush. I figured it wouldn't result in the same evenly smooth surface of vapor, but for a functional part like this, I was curious to see if it got the job done. I gave this part a few rounds of acetone brushing with some time to dry in between, and soon enough the surface did become glossy and slightly smoother. It's certainly not a full replacement for vapor smoothing, but it sure is easier, and the acetone still dissolves the plastic, so that should still strengthen the bond between the print layers. For now, I decided to keep one ring unsmoothed for the sake of comparison over time, so if one ever ends up deteriorating faster than the other, I'll give you all an update. I used a shorter version of the same nylon straps that I used for my first set of rings, and they ended up being the perfect height for my dead hang. I also hung up a smaller ring that I printed in PLA, since some people were curious to see how that would hold up. I've seen people share PLA prints that completely disintegrated after some time outdoors, while other people have prints that have survived decades in the sun, so this will be an interesting one to keep an eye on. Finally, being a climber, I also designed a more finger-focused print with this hanging fingerboard. It's got 5 different edges that get progressively smaller, so it'll remain useful as you get stronger, and it just provides more versatility in training. These are actually printed in PLA as well, and PLA can often feel too slippery for climbing holds and things like that, but I wanted to give it a shot, so I modeled in these little ridges all around the fingerboard and I found that it does actually make them quite grippy and usable. They're also super strong. Every now and then I do work out more traditionally, and for that I've printed these push-up grips. I learned that the extra height of these stands versus regular push-ups does quite a lot for chest strength, and considering how strong my rings ended up, I figured I could print these as well. It would really suck if these broke, so I made sure the design was extra beefy without using too much filament. It's got TPU grips glued on the bottom, which do a surprisingly good job of preventing slipping and protecting the floor. And this triangular construction is super sturdy, so I can trust these with all of my silly acrobatics. Now, the day after a workout, my entire body loves to remind me that I'm getting old. So after an especially sore day, I was driven to design some aggressive massage balls. This is another design that I've split up into multiple parts to improve printing and functionality. It consists of a TPU outer surface that's just slightly flexible for comfort, but the PLA core makes sure that these can handle your entire body weight and provide a painfully deep massage in the best way. I split the ball in half mainly so I could print everything without supports, and the Qidi Plus4 handled these TPU prints amazingly. But a nice side effect is that you can also mix and match different halves for your own preferences and have varying infill levels for different hardnesses if you please. And you can even just use one half on the ground or against the wall if you don't want it to move around. Another physical therapy device I learned about and decided to print were these Spiky Rollers. Apparently these have a lot of benefits like releasing tension in myofascial tissue and increasing blood flow for post-workout recovery. But for me, it was kind of just a design challenge to see how spiky I could 3D print rollers, and these ended up working quite well. They can be a little bit squeaky, but otherwise they're super satisfying, and these handheld rollers worked so well that I decided to make some foot rollers next. And now I have one of these under my work desk at all times so I can fidget with my feet. This next one's a bit weird, kind of gross, but with my feet apparently getting all this attention on the channel, for better or worse, I have to maintain them as best as I can. So I decided to print these foot fish. These have varying levels of intensity on their scales, which can scrape dead skin off of your feet after soaking them in the shower. I think it's another old person problem, but too much dead skin on the bottom of your feet can actually lead to discomfort and infections. So this isn't just a cosmetic treatment. Kind of gross, but also kind of satisfying. Wait, why are we talking about my feet? This video's about home prints. Home prints, lighting. For too long, my home has been lit by bare feet. I mean bulbs, bare light bulbs. Lighting is one of my favorite things to design because the light itself adds so much to any object. It's literally visible energy, and that makes it so captivating. But when it came to designing light shades for my house, I faced a bit of paralysis over the endless possibilities. And I also wanted lights that were big enough to have a commanding presence, to be a centerpiece over a dining table or a desk. So when I got the Qidi Plus4 with that 305mm square bed, I decided it was finally time to come up with something. And to help me make decisions, I gave myself two somewhat conflicting constraints. I wanted to make it a vase mode print, but I also wanted to incorporate layering to diffuse and interact with the light source. Vase mode involves printing objects with a single wall as a continuous spiral of filament, and that generally results in really clean prints that use relatively little material. The limitation is that not all shapes can be printed as a single spiral. Now, there are lots of ways to hack vase mode to accomplish all kinds of surprising things, and I'm sure I'll explore more of that in future projects. But in this case, my solution was quite simple: to stack several vase mode prints together to achieve that layering that I wanted. And okay, I didn't exactly decide on one single design, but even better, I made a modular system. So these are my 3-tier pendant lights, And for now, I have a cone variety and a cylinder variety. The individual parts are super simple to print in vase mode, and then they just nestle together for more visual interest and a nice interaction with the light. By adding different textures to the shapes, the light is stretched and warped in different directions, and you can always play around with the color of the prints and the light for a ton of customization there. And while there is an intended configuration for these pieces, I'm always for experimentation and breaking the rules, so I'd love to see y'all mix and match to make your own creations. I do still have some bare triple bulb lights above me that do need cover, but I'll take care of that in a future video using the much larger 𝐒𝐓𝐿𝐥 printer. Here's one massive version of that cone pendant I made on that machine, and you've probably also noticed these big posters behind me. Those were also printed on the 𝐒𝐓𝐿𝐥, but I did make some smaller versions of those as well. This is an artwork I call Scorcher. It portrays the epic power of the sun. And here's another one called Koin, which is based on a Japanese expression that uses the concept of light and shadow, or the sun and the moon, as a representation for the passage of time. I think these do a good job of showing how the Qidi Plus4 handles filament swaps really well. And in fact, one of my favorite features on this printer is the manual filament cutter that makes filament swaps really quick. Instead of having to heat up and retract filament, you just cut it off near the extruder with the press of a button and feed in the next spool. It's a simple idea, but such a convenience since you can remove filaments without the printer even being turned on. These were printed using Polymaker's Neon PLA, which is super reactive to black light. So that creates a really cool effect, and I really need to figure out where I'm gonna put a black light room in my house. Anyways, decoration is nice, but much better is functional decoration. I recently got these nice big bar magnets. They're nice and strong, but also not exactly something I'd want to display in my home. And yet, the more magnets around me, the better.
I feed off of their energy.
So my solution was to simply design a case around these magnets, and you can't go wrong with a squiggle. At first, I made a bunch of filament swaps during the concentric infill of this first layer for a super colorful result, but combined with the colorful magnetic keychains I made, it actually felt like a bit too much color for once. Also, with this PLA surface, the magnets can slide around a bit too easily, so I ended up printing a black cover using flexible TPU instead. That improved the grip, and I think it looks better in this color as well. Unfortunately, within a few days, my wall magnet turned into a floor magnet. The acrylic tape I used peeled off of the wall under the weight of the magnets and keys, so in the end, I just screwed the bar into the wall, and I also made the squiggle vertical, since I can't make up my mind on these things. I also put up a smaller squiggle magnet in the kitchen. I already have one for my knives, but like I said, the more magnets, the better. I wasn't sure how I'd end up using this one, but I have been using it quite a bit to hold utensils that I plan to keep using, which happens pretty often since I'm always picking away at food before I've actually finished cooking a full meal. Around the kitchen, I've also got a Perspectiva sponge holder. I've got this phone stand for video calls, these little rubber stoppers for my cabinets, a raindrop cup top to cover my garlic, and this snapping dirty clean indicator on my dishwasher. But beyond dealing with these little inconveniences, there are actually cases where 3D printing can solve big issues. A few weeks ago, my kitchen sink started draining more and more slowly, up to the point where I couldn't ignore it any longer. After spending way too much money on drain cleaners that did nothing, I printed this drain snake that prints coiled up, and you can unravel it with a heat gun or hairdryer. I would be more proud of it, except obviously these snakes really only help with hair clogs, which isn't the problem with my kitchen sink. So I followed up with a more brute force approach by printing a giant accordion plunger using Bambu Lab TPU. By making this plunger a perfect match for my sink, the clog would have nowhere to go but down and out to the ocean, or apparently out of this overflow drain. But covering that up, there's nowhere to hide. And sure enough, within a few plunges, my kitchen sink was draining like new. All right, problem solved. Well, except, you wouldn't believe this, but apparently the clog just got pushed down the pipes to a different part of my house, because later that same night, my shower stopped draining. So I grabbed my mega plunger and I tried plunging the shower drain, but that drain's a bit bigger, so it didn't quite work. So I just printed an adapter to seal that larger drain entirely and started plunging.
Uh-oh, it's getting gross.
I don't think it would be good for viewership to show you the aftermath of this operation. It was not pretty. Instead of just pushing everything down and out of my life, the plunger was sucking everything back out and into the shower. Just awful. Smelly chunks of God knows what. It was not the brightest of days. But after a few hours of that, there was nothing left to clog my shower. And now I'm much more careful about what goes down the kitchen sink. Well, I'm officially traumatized, and I think we've gone over a whole lot of home prints by now, so let's just rapid fire a few stragglers and try to get on with our lives, shall we? We've got these display columns, which you can print normally like this, or with a twist. Just a silly idea I had, but you can see how nice and big I was able to make these on the Qidi Plus4. Pretty cool. Then there's this ASA clip I printed to keep my lawnmower running without me having to grab onto the bail lever the entire time, because I value comfort over safety. Also for the garden, I printed this hand drill mixer to stir up a salt and vinegar formula that makes an excellent weed killer. And to take care of those dead weeds, I made this burner on a stick. Work in progress. I made some little TPU feet to keep this cabinet from rolling around, a TPU guitar capo extender, a TPU lens for my camera, and I'm sure there are a bunch of other things I've forgotten about, but I think I've made my point here. There is a lot to be printed around the house, and I promise it's some of the most satisfying work you'll do with your 3D printer, because these are the kinds of prints that you're using every day and appreciating constantly. As far as this Qidi Plus4, you've seen that it was able to handle all of the crazy things I threw at it. Like the Q1 Pro, it's got a few quirks here and there. The UI is not quite as polished as the Bamboo X1 Carbon, but it's still very usable. And at $800 USD, it is approaching the price of that X1 Carbon. So I would ask myself whether I'll really benefit from the larger build volume of the Plus4 in order to justify it. Being able to print larger things can be really nice, but it also means you're gonna spend a longer time heating up the bed, leveling things, and starting prints. So if you're not gonna use all that space, take a look at the X1 Carbon, or even the much cheaper Qidi Q1 Pro, which has been working really wonderfully for me. Honestly, all three are great printers, and that just goes to show how good 3D printers have become. Again, Qidi did not pay me, but they did give me the printer for free in exchange for sharing my honest opinion. If you do buy it, through the link in the video description, I'll get a nice commission, and links to all of these cool prints will also be down there. Like and subscribe if you like what you saw. Yeehaw! Get your print on. And stay inspired. Almost forgot the catchphrase.